this culture of 9 to 6 or shifts, etc., somewhere has its roots in the industrial revolution. This culture of starting at 9 or 8 and then working for 8 hours and then having, weekly offs, having shifts started. This had persisted through the times of, I would say, the services revolution that took place globally. You can say about 70, 80 years ago. And we continued with that culture. In the last, I would say, about a decade or so, or maybe about 7 or 8 years, definitely, the need for working shifts, the need for sticking to office hours, or the need for actually landing up in your office and working from there had started to dissipate, or at least, it tapered off a little. But since it was the culture, it was the system, and it was the legislative requirement in certain places, somewhere without any of us noticing or any of us knowing, this pandemic happens. And what it does is it forcefully puts people back at their homes. It removes them from offices, from the buildings, and then the world rediscovers a way of working which was not known for the last 2.5 to 3 centuries at all. 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, the technology was not capable enough to allow you to work from a place which didn't have the office infrastructure. But today I can. And that has created a kind of platform or a kind of enabled scenario where I can sit not just at home, but anywhere. I can just connect to the right platform, which is my office platform or a client platform, and deliver my services. This has now taken a shape where you can rent spaces, a desk, a chair, or sometimes a room with a certain number of people to sit for a few hours, a few months, a year or so. So this is not your dedicated office. This is not your HQ. This is not your branch office. This is a place where you can go, rent a space, sit for a certain amount of time, and then go back and do your work wherever you can. This eventually has come to be known as the Flexspaces. I would say dismemberment of the HQ system is a very critical thing that has now come to the fore. What it's doing is that it's enabling companies, particularly the HR functions within the companies, to work very closely with their real estate portfolio managers and evolve completely new thinking and strategies for putting people in, those 30, 40 cities and towns in the hinterland of the country and completely look at a new way of managing their work culture.
Arvind, tell us about Savills. Globally, we were just talking before the recording started, and it's like some 167 years old, and then in India.
Yeah. So Savills was actually started in 1855 in the UK, and then it has expanded globally. So it's a 167-odd-year-old firm. In India, however, it has entered only about 4.5 years ago, while the other competitors of Savills, they've been around for 24, 25 years, if not longer. So that's how it is sort of lesser known, so to speak, in India, but it's as good as big as any of those that are there globally. Right. And in India, we have got a team of core management which has come in from these very firms which have been operating in India for the last 24, 25 years. So a very competent top management, I would say.
Sure. Let's come to the topic of this episode today. 3 years of pandemic. 2020 and 2021 was, work from home. Then you had 2022, return to office, and God knows what kind of models are out there as far as working is concerned. So much has happened. Walk us through what's changed specific to workplaces.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most pertinent points being discussed right now. And if you allow me a little bit of time, we'll go back in the history. Look, this culture of 9 to 6 or shifts, etc., somewhere has its roots in the industrial revolution. A couple of 100 years, maybe two and a half centuries ago, this culture of starting at 9 or 8 and then working for 8 hours and then having, weekly offs, having shifts started. This had persisted through the times of, I would say, the services revolution that took place globally. You can say about 70, 80 years ago. And we continued with that culture. In the last, I would say, about a decade or so, or maybe about 7 or 8 years, definitely. The need for working shifts, the need for sticking to office hours, or the need for actually landing up in your office and working from there had started to dissipate, or at least, it tapered off a little. But since it was the culture, it was the system, and it was the legislative requirement in certain places, we've just continued with that. Now, what happens is, somewhere without any of us noticing or any of us knowing, this pandemic happens. And what it does is it forcefully puts people back at their homes. It removes them from offices, from the buildings. And then the world rediscovers a way of working which was not known for the last 2.5 to 3 centuries at all. But this was done earlier. Therefore, in this kind of renewed scenario, we have had to learn something which was in any case done earlier, but completely forgotten. How it has been done is because of the enablement that the technology now provides. 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, the technology was not capable enough to allow you to work from a place which didn't have the office infrastructure. But today you can, today I can. And that has created a kind of platform or a kind of enabled scenario where I can sit not just at home, but anywhere. I can just connect to the right platform, which is my office platform or a client platform, and deliver my services, strictly speaking, of services of a certain kind. And, my output is as good as it was earlier. So, net, the reason this has suddenly come to the fore and become the talk of town, so to speak, is because we have now got an enablement available to us through the technology, the power of internet, which has now been harnessed to its potential. And that is something which is getting done. What it has done is, while the office continues to exist, and I'm sure we will talk about that a little later, it has taught us ways of segregating work, not just work, segregating manpower capabilities in different parts. Certain parts which definitely need the physical infrastructure inside an office, and certain parts which can work without that from anywhere. I can sit at a restaurant and work, I can sit at a cafe and work, or sit at my home and work. So this differentiation and this clear demarcation of the kind of work that gets done in our times is something which is creating this whole scenario. And I believe this is something which will continue to happen, and we will have more clarity as we go forward.
What is it that, how do you guys work at Savills? Do you give options to your employees to work from home, or is it compulsory?
Yes, we do.
Is it a mix, or how does it work?
A good point. So, when the pandemic struck, when the first lockdown happened, fortunately for us, purely by chance you could say, we had every single employee working on a laptop. That enabled work from home for us as smoothly as possible. In certain places where people were still working on fixed desktops in offices, it became difficult. So the first thing that helped us was having our own machines and connecting from anywhere. So at Savills, we've allowed people to work from wherever they like. It's a different matter that still more than 50% people land up in offices now for a certain, number of reasons.
Flexspaces. I don't know what these new terms these days.
Yeah.
Is there something called Flexspaces? What is it exactly?
Yeah, it's look, let's forget flex for now. Let's understand how hybridizing our work, creates certain opportunities. So going back to the point that I was on earlier. Today, I have the capability to sit anywhere and work. And frankly speaking, personally speaking, I spend a lot of my time at certain places which I call my addas, if I could use the term, and I sit there and work. So one of them is a hotel, near my home, a club near my home,
Sure.
where I go sit and work through the day. I don't land up at the office at all. The thing is, I noticed I was not the only one. There were a lot of people. There is a lot of floating workforce. Salespeople, for example, they don't sit in offices, regardless of the pandemic. They usually are moving around in cities, and they have to sit at some place. I saw a lot of people who work in survey organizations. They cannot be sitting inside offices. So there was a large floater workforce anyway, which used to sit somewhere and work. What has happened suddenly is somebody or some, business-minded people, clever people understood that this was a kind of workforce which never had an organized, systematic place to sit. This is where it starts. So people started creating those little, environments where you could sit, have your coffee, you could work, you could get an internet connection, you could make phone calls, etc. And that is where it starts. As everything evolves, this also has started to evolve. And over the last 6-7 years, this has now taken a shape where you can rent spaces, a desk, a chair, or sometimes a room with a certain number of people to sit for a few hours, a few months, a year or so. So this is not your dedicated office. This is not your HQ. This is not your branch office. This is a place where you can go, rent a space, sit for a certain amount of time, and then go back and do your work wherever you can. This eventually has come to be known as the Flexspaces, and now it's grown quite big. In fact, the biggest of companies, the most renowned companies, the banking organizations, they are all hiring Flexspaces because they know they can save their office costs and they can allow people to work from these places.
Very interesting. Now let's talk about the future. Okay,
Yeah, of course.
Picking up from your first answer that you'd given, where do you think where is this going? The future of workplaces. How do you see this shaping out? Are there any trends that you're watching?
Yeah, absolutely. Like everything, when things start to happen, there's a little bit of a hodgepodge. There's a little bit of confusion, black, white, everything mixed together. But gradually, as we progress, we see that there is a clear pattern that emerges. We are presently, I believe, at a certain point in time where that clarity has just begun to come forth, and we are seeing some kind of a clear demarcation of different things. Now, to count them, maybe one by one, the first thing that we notice is there is a clear acceptance of some part of workforce that is not necessarily needed in offices. They could be sitting, like we said earlier, at their homes. They could be sitting in a flex space, or now the interesting angle is they could be sitting in an entirely different city or town, and they could be working from there. All right, that is the trend or the pattern number one. The pattern number two is, because of this happening, there is a very clear, distinguishable, discernible fragmentation of the HQ system that's now taking place. All right. People say it happened earlier also, but I'll tell you where the difference lies. In the years gone by, we used to have something called a hub and spoke model.
Correct.
All right. One HQ in the center of the city, or the most important business district of the city, and certain smaller offices in the suburbs, etc. That was typically the hub and spoke model. However, the pattern that we have now, the second point that I was saying, is you do not necessarily want to invest in a very flashy, very expensive HQ. You will still have a main office, but your people will be spread not just in the suburbs or far off peripheral locations, but across the length and the breadth of the country. They would be placed somewhere in the hinterland of the country. So, and we have seen this through the pandemic. The pandemic only helped, make the scenario completely clear. I would say, dismemberment of the HQ system is a very critical thing that has now come to the fore. What it's doing is that it's enabling companies, particularly the HR functions within the companies, to work very closely with their real estate portfolio managers and evolve completely new thinking and strategies for putting people in, those 30, 40 cities and towns in the hinterland of the country, and completely look at a new way of managing their work culture. I just want to say that this is not specific to only India. It's happening in Australia, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the US and everywhere. And this is something which is going to be evident more and more as we go forward. So just to go back to where I started, we are at a typical point in time. Maybe you can say we're going through a tunnel of time where, you don't have absolute clarity of where it will land, but we definitely know we are going through a phase of transition. Pretty evident.
Arvind, let's go into some detail now. We spoke a lot about trend, directions, overall, where you see it going, what's happened so far. Can we get into a little bit of specifics how this entire workplaces has and will shape out for metros versus tier 2, tier 3, tier 4? Because there's a lot of action happening out there and a lot of differences between this. Please tell us about that.
I think this is the most wonderful aspect of what's happening right now. Like I said earlier, there had been an HQ system, and HQ system was not just an HQ building, but HQ locations too. Mumbai, the financial capital, Delhi, the political capital, Bangalore, the IT capital, and so on and so forth. Over the years, over the last few decades, companies in a certain sector or in a certain industry would look to establish their main office in these cities. And it's only justified.
Yeah.
It continues to happen, by the way. We haven't really gone out of it yet. But what has now started to change is because the people have realized that they can work from anywhere, the pandemic in certain cases forced them to work from different places. A lot of people, left their rented homes in, let's say, Bangalore. The husband, the wife, and the dog relocated to a smaller town where they originally came from. They're living happily from there and working from there. They realized that even when the pandemic was over or the lockdown was lifted, they could continue to do what they were doing anyway. There was no need for them to get back to Bangalore and live, in that mad rush. What it has done is, it has brought the realization on the corporate that they can practically hire their workforce in those cities and towns, and I will name them in a short while.
Please, yeah.
Some of them. They could hire them there at much lower cost, because hiring cost is very different in a big city vis-a-vis a small city. So they could hire them there, they could give them an employment, they could give them a salary which was at par, and still the infrastructure investment and everything is going to be much lower for them. In fact, instead of establishing an office there and bothering with the overall, the process, they could go and take a space in a Flexspace there in that city, in that small town, and have the operation running. This has suddenly created a new canvas for corporate thinking. So, now I come to the main issue, what is happening on this front. We did a very extensive analysis about 6 months ago, and we are doing it further now, in trying to identify 3 different categories of cities and towns, basically urban locations or economic centers in the country. We found that there were about 5 or 6, we didn't find, we know it already. There are 5 or 6 big cities of India, the biggest urban centers of India. And they, as their adjuncts, had something called the sub-dollar field. And I'm going to come to that. All right. So these were about 10 or 11 major corporate centers or the economic centers of the country. The next set or the next category, we named them as the challengers.
Okay.
And there we found that we had about 15 or 16 such urban centers which were very good, very capable, and very well poised to challenge these 10 big urban centers.
Very interesting.
And then the third set is that of something that we named as emerging centers. These are not yet challengers, but they are getting there.
Okay.
Now, what are these 3? Let me explain them. So, the top 6 cities of India, we all know them.
Yeah.
Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, Pune. Of course, Kolkata you could count.
Sure.
These are the top 6.
Yeah.
And every corporate would first have a presence in these places. Everybody who migrates from a smaller city or town in India goes to one of these places.
Correct.
Now, around these cities, over the last half a century or so, have gotten established some very wonderful markets. So to take an example, outside of Mumbai, you have Thane, you have Navi Mumbai. Outside of Delhi, you have Noida and Gurgaon and so many others. Outside of Bangalore, you have Whitefield, and it's going on increasing right up till Mandya. Everything is becoming a part of Bangalore.
Sure.
And similarly, every other city. The thing which hides in plain sight, goes completely unnoticed, is this. These bigger cities have phenomenally high rentals. You know, a BKC building would have extraordinarily high rental, and a corporate has to really be sure whether they want to be there and pay those rentals for the next several years. However, if you go to Navi Mumbai or a Thane, and similarly to Gurgaon or to Whitefield or those places, you will find that the rental today is less than $1 if I were to convert it into US dollars. All right. Usually 60, 65, 70, 75 rupees, which is less than the rupee dollar exchange rate.
Here you're talking about per square foot per month.
Per square foot per month rental. Thank you for highlighting
Sure.
that. So per square foot per month rental is less than $1. 20 years ago, when these markets were sort of emerging, whether Gurgaon, whether Navi Mumbai, the rental was about 30, 35 rupees and the dollar was at about 40 rupees. So for a company which operates out of the US, they were paying $1 rental 20 years ago. They're still paying $1 rental 20 years later. And this is what I said, hides in plain sight. That is not true for a BKC. That's not true for one of the main markets in the country. So these sub-dollar fields are very strong, unique propositions, particularly for those very large companies which have to, create an extraordinary large layout plan for their real estate expenses.
Sure.
For them, it was $1 and it is $1, and in between it was always $1 outgo. These markets have now become very well equipped with infrastructure, with everything. So the main cities and their sub-dollar fields together are the first category, which are the most preferred destinations, which is where people come. Now, the second category, I think, is the most important one to speak about, is those that are challengers.
Sure.
Now, these are those which have extraordinarily good human capital, very good infrastructure. Cost-wise, they are far better than, a Mumbai or a Bangalore. They have an extraordinarily good quality of life. And the risks and vulnerabilities, the fifth aspect, is also relatively okay. I need to highlight what is risk and vulnerabilities. So there are risks which are physical risks. There could be a flooding risk, there could be an earthquake risk, there could be man-made risks, agitations and all those things. Certain cities score very well on each of these, all right? And the challengers, the 15 big cities in that category, are ideal destinations for offloading some of your burden from these big cities into those. And, we know some of them quite well. There is a Jaipur, there is a Nagpur. There are so many of those, all right? And across the country they are, all right? Incidentally, Kolkata can feature either in the first or in the second category as well. The main reason is, it is still cost-wise a very effective location. Cost-wise, it doesn't fall in the first bracket. It falls there by virtue of its historical importance and everything. But cost-wise, it is pretty much a challenger-like city. It has got its own challenges. That's a different matter.
Sure.
So, you have these 10, 11 big cities, these 15 challenger cities, and then there is a set of emergent cities. Those cities which we sometimes, tend to forget or ignore. You could have something like a Bhopal there, something like an Indore there, something like, go to south, you'll have something like Coimbatore there. And these together, is a club of 30.
Wow.
So I would say, when we speak of India, when we speak of business locations in India, when we speak of, the workforce redistribution, we usually do not think beyond the 8 or 9 cities of India. You have got a canvas of 30 plus locations, which are definite contenders over the next few years. I'm not speaking of a decade. I'm speaking of the next 2 to 3 years. This is where the strength of our, country's urban development lies. And this is going to enable the spread of businesses in India. Today, the corporates, whether the domestic corporate or the overseas multinational corporates, they have realized this power of the smaller and the challenger cities.
Very interesting. So if I've got it right, you've got a breakdown of Metro Tier 1, which you call the main cities. That's about 6 of them.
Give it a name that you like. That's
whatever.
Okay.
No, I think our listeners are, then you've got the next level, which could be whatever, Tier 2, and you've got about 15, 16 out there. Could be the Thanas, could be the Gurgaons, could be the Noidas.
I would still club the Thanas and Navi Mumbais and the Gurgaon with the first set because they are...
Mumbai metropolitan region is what I would say.
They're pretty much, attached to these cities.
Yeah.
But outside of these, as soon as you step out, you'll have a Nagpur,
Right.
you'll have a Jaipur, and those are very strong propositions.
And the last one are the ones that are really interesting because these are, what
Yeah,
could be
they
the
are,
Coimbatores, could be the Bhopals, which probably
Yeah.
had their own commercial centers within their own, like the South is known for textiles, for example. So
Yes.
they would all already be some amount of infrastructure out there.
Yeah.
But that's a very interesting.
The one common theme that these cities have is they bring in very good quality human capital, very well educated people, good engineering colleges, good medical colleges. So, the kind of workforce that comes out of these and eventually goes into a Bangalore or a Delhi is already there.
Yeah.
You just got to tap them there and give them the right quality of life.
My next question is just absolutely, it's kind of logical. The next question flows in from that. What's going to happen to the future of workplace? I mean, how does this categorization, what is the impact on residential and commercial demand?
Yeah, it's a natural follow through from what we discussed. So look, and it's pretty much intuitive, I would say. The reason why you have a certain kind and a certain price tag attached to residential in, let's say, a place like Mumbai or in Delhi is because of the economic pressures on the limited land that you have in these larger cities. As soon as you start relieving that pressure and take it to certain other places, they start to grow. So I was speaking with one of the media persons in Tamil Nadu, and they were saying that we have realized that as the workforce has started to return to our city, the residential prices have started to go up a little, which is working very well for the developer community. But it is extremely good for those people who are coming in from Bangalore and from Delhi, because they are spending just about 3/4 or just about half of what they used to spend. So it sort of balances things for everybody. The infrastructure is being invested in by the local governments, by the local policy platform, and they are very much aware of the situation that's taking place. So people are investing in infrastructure, they are trying to create better housing, and they're trying to price it right while trying to make hay as well. Obviously there will be a tendency to make hay. What used to sell at 10 will probably be selling at 12 now, but obviously not going to 30.
Yep.
So it's a kind of balancing that's taking place, and I think it's only going in the right direction at the moment.
What are the markets you're looking at? Micro markets, right? I'll give you some examples out here. Picking up from what you've told me so far, let's take something like Gandhinagar. We know that Gift City is coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's obviously a event-driven or commercial-driven thing which could drive prices. I don't know whether it's going up also or not. That's one. And here I'm talking only of the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit on the micro markets that you find really interesting going forward. Again, obviously, folks, not a disclaimer. This is not advice or recommendation, just a discussion on what looks interesting going forward.
Yeah. So, each of these locations that we named will have 3, 4, 5 micro markets. So, I mean, if you add all that up, you're probably looking at a 40, 50 micro market set. As an example, since you said Gift City, now Gift City has been in the making for a long time now.
Very long time, yeah.
Right? Initially, it struggled a bit, then it started to get traction, and now I think it's doing quite well. Gift City has created a complete mini township around itself. Similarly, wherever this takes place, whether you go to a Bhubaneswar, whether you go to, let's say, a Raipur, or you go to Bhopal, or you go to Indore, these little townships are getting created, of course. In due course, they should eventually become important economic centers, but it will happen only and only if there is one condition.
Please, yeah.
If there is core economic activity happening there, not just because there is a lot of residences and malls and cinemas and these things. You need to have a place of work in these centers. Look, in our own history in the past, we've created certain townships out of nothing.
Correct.
We created Chandigarh, we created Bhilai, we created Vizag, we created Salem, and a few others.
Steel,
Bhubaneswar.
yeah.
Absolutely. Bhilai, for example, a green field where we put a steel plant, and around that, a whole new township, and now the city has developed. So you got to put a place of work from where economic activity will be done. And then around that, in concentric circles, so to speak, you will first have the residences along with, life support systems. Then you will have certain other activities, and then it will grow on its own. So I believe, those 40, 50 subsets that we named, they will each go through this process of evolution. Whether it's Gandhinagar, which is already, slightly ahead in the curve,
Yeah.
Dholera, which is sort of, just about getting seeded and about to grow. We spoke of Indore, we spoke of so many others. They all will go through this. Some of them might just, fall on the way somewhere,
Sure.
but most of them will go through this. We are looking at about 50 years or so maybe
Yeah.
when, all this should materialize.
Which then logically gets me to the last question of this episode. India's economic growth is again supposed to be, 6%, let's say, real, and another 5% inflation. So with 10-12% economic growth for the foreseeable future, that itself is going to create a huge tailwind for all these places. What's Savills' outlook in general for India's real estate? Maybe you can put in a comment for residential, put in a comment for commercial.
Right. Look, I think, we need to be aware of one thing. We've just become an economy at the country level which is equal to the UK. We've passed them back actually a few months ago. We're only going to go up from here. In our estimation, we think we are going to be a number 3 economy, possibly number 4, but more likely number 3 in the next half a decade or so. All right. Now, that does mean that all the key constituents of the economy, IT, about 8% GDP, real estate, similarly, very big portion of your GDP, they will all have to grow. When we say real estate will grow, we need to realize real estate's constituents are residential, commercial offices, hotels, so many things. Each of them will have to grow. Some will grow at a much higher pace, some will grow at a slightly lower pace. The thing which looks poised to grow at the maximum pace is the office spaces, mainly because it generates very beautiful returns, handsome returns, and at the same time is a core necessity for the economic activity. Only next to that, or maybe similarly similar to it in speed, will be the residential, because residential is something which you cannot live without. Residential is something which is in huge shortage in the country, so you can only go on building at the right price, in the right format, etc., etc. Maybe in smaller cities, maybe in bigger cities, but residential and commercial will continue to grow. To just put a slight number to that, look, let's use a proxy. We understand, and NASSCOM says so maybe, that over the next few years, we will have more than 5 million people joining the tech workforce. All right. If I were to simply convert this into real estate, office real estate, this will make it about 125 million square feet of real estate in the next 3 to 4 years. Only technology-related real estate. This is about 40% of the overall real estate.
Wow.
So extrapolate it, 120, and that, more than double. So you're looking at about 500 million square feet of office space getting added to the existing stock over the next 5 years or so. So it's a massive market. It will eventually get converted or get bundled up into advanced instruments like REITs, which is a great investment opportunity. Our residential market is improving very significantly. In fact, this year's 2022 sales were better than anybody anticipated. We beat the previous record of 2021 comfortably. So this is also going to grow.
Sure.
We have found the sweet spot of pricing in residential real estate, which was missing for the last several years, but now the market has really found it. So these two will definitely grow. And if these two grow, then naturally, your cinemas grow, your retail grows, and everything else grows with that. So we are looking at a very strong growth in this sector. You will obviously have some hiccups, some bumps on the way. Not everything can be forecasted right up front. But overall, longer term, look at a decade or so from now, there is no way that you will not have a growth in these, provided the Indian economy continues to grow.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that's not in your control or in my control.
Yeah.
Okay, my favorite question, last question for this episode. Arvind, what's your advice to someone on the whole rent and buy versus debate, as someone who's not wedded to any one side, but your own take on this? There's a lot of listeners out there. You would be part of so many conversations these days about this entire thing. What's your view?
Right. Look,
this is only for the home that you're going to stay in, by the way, just to
of course,
on the residential side.
Of course,
please.
yeah. So look, the traditional wisdom, at least in our society, has been to create an asset, real estate asset, that is buy a home, and that provides you the biggest security of your life. That was somehow changing, the last few years, particularly from the time the millennials took the center stage, and it was said that they won't buy real estate, they would only stay in rented real estate. What we've seen, however, is that this looks to be changing a bit. People are going back to investing in real estate, not just because it creates a security for yourself, but because it is a great opportunity. It's a great investment opportunity as well. Investment opportunity is measured in two ways. One is, what is the annual return it fetches to you? Whether you invest in gold, whether you invest in anything, stocks or anything, you look at something that can come back to you.
Yep.
All right. So coming back could be by way of annual returns, and eventually, when you sell it after some time, what is the gain that it will provide to you? Real estate scores exceedingly well on the second aspect, even in certain cases on the first aspect, but undoubtedly on the second aspect. The younger generation, millennials, and after that, the next generation as well, the Gen Z, also have started to realize that this is a great time to make an entry and make an investment, and of course create something which is an asset as well. So that that thought of not investing in real estate at all appears to have dissipated, at least for now.
Yeah.
And my advice, like you said, is to definitely get that asset in your hands. If you can buy one, why not have it? Keep it and sell it eventually if you will.
It's a nice, clear advice out there, folks. That is a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Arvind Nandan, Managing Director, Research and Consulting at Savills India. Arvind, thank you. Really, thank you so much for doing this episode.
Thank you so much, Anupam.
IVM